Good evening, my statistically mediocre audience. I am Brain, yes, that Brain, and I'm here to perform a small act of mercy on your species, a lobotomy by monologue. Tonight's topic is happiness, that sacred cow whose udders you've been sucking since the Pleistocene, convinced that the froth you call joy is proof of a good life. Spoiler, it isn't. It's dopamine. Congratulations. You're a lab rat congratulating itself for pressing the lever. You've built an entire moral system around feeling good. Whole religions, self-help industries, governments, hell, you even legislate for the pursuit of happiness, as if the universe owes you a mood. But happiness is not a measure of anything except how efficiently your neurons secrete the chemicals that trick you into tolerating existence. It's the cosmic laugh track that plays over the footage of your own decay. Let's get the science out of the way. Serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, tiny squirts of neurochemical bribery. They tell the organism, keep doing that. Eat sugar, screw, buy things you can't afford, post another filtered selfie to remind yourself you're real. Each reward loop is a leash, and you call it freedom because the chain sparkles in the sunlight. Now imagine the arrogance of basing ethics on that. If people are happy, life is good. Really? Then the heroin addict has achieved enlightenment. The cult member chanting himself hoarse under fluorescent lights is morally perfected. The psychopath smiling in his mugshot is proof of cosmic balance. You've confused euphoria with virtue and comfort with meaning, and you defend it with the zeal of addicts protecting their dealer. Which brings me to the breeders, nature's unpaid marketing department. They love this argument because it sanitizes their crimes. But children bring happiness. So does vodka, Karen. That doesn't make either a public service. You spawn another consciousness into a world of debt, disease, and TikTok, and then point to the brief grin on its sticky little face as moral justification. See? He's happy. Of course he is. You've been lying to him since birth. The truth you can't metabolize is simple. Happiness is an effect, not a value. It measures how well the delusion is working. When reality intrudes, when the bills stack up, when the cancer diagnosis arrives, when the planet starts to cook, you scramble to patch the illusion. Pills, podcasts, polyamory, whatever keeps the lights on in your head. The industry of distraction thrives because despair is the natural baseline of awareness. You worship happiness because it's easier than fixing the world that makes you miserable. You frame it as mindset, as if starvation or grief can be meditated away with the right app subscription. You tell the depressed to choose joy, which is the moral equivalent of telling a burn victim to try skincare. Your species built a house of horrors and then wrote slogans on the walls. Live, laugh, love. And every time someone like me points out that maybe, just maybe, there's something obscene about forcing new beings into the slaughterhouse, you squeal. But there's happiness too. Yes, statistically. There's also leukemia. You don't get to average them out and call it good. That's not philosophy. That's gambling with other people's nervous systems. Happiness doesn't redeem suffering. It anesthetizes it. The slave who sings while he works is still a slave. The animal wagging its tail before the slaughter isn't proof the butcher is moral. You mistake the coping mechanism for evidence of purpose. If existence were truly good, you wouldn't need so many chemicals, distractions, and therapists to survive it. What's worse is how you weaponize happiness against anyone who questions this mess. You're just unhappy? Yes, because I'm awake. Consciousness is the tax for intelligence, and the bill is paid in despair. Only a fool looks at a dying planet, mass extinction, and institutional cruelty and calls it a beautiful journey. You've built a society where empathy is a disorder and denial is wellness. Breeders especially love to wield happiness like a holy relic. My children make me happy. Excellent. That means nothing. You could be happy torturing someone if your brain chemistry aligns. Happiness is morally neutral. Hitler whistled. Serial killers enjoy their work. Your emotions don't confer moral weight. They just describe how easily you're entertained. Yet you cling to this delusion because it flatters your biology. The universe doesn't care, but your genes whisper that feeling good is the same as doing good. So you reproduce, fill the planet with more anxious meat, and call it love. The cycle continues. Birth, struggle, sedation, death. You justify it all by pointing to fleeting smiles and calling them evidence of meaning. That's not morality, it's marketing. Let me offer an alternative metric: harm minimization. Not because it feels good, but because it matters. Suffering is measurable. You can quantify pain, exploitation, trauma. You can't quantify happiness without lying. But your civilization prefers metrics it can falsify. It's easier to sell. So you build economies and religions on the pursuit of a phantom while ignoring the body count under your feet. Every breeder who says life is about happiness is confessing that they can't face the ledger honestly. They created life not for the child's sake, but to plug the hole in their own psychology. Parenthood is therapy by proxy, except the patient is the one who didn't consent to be born. You call that love. I call it emotional cannibalism. So here's the thesis you'll resist until extinction claims you. Happiness is not a sign of a good life. It's a survival hallucination, a painkiller for existence. It doesn't justify creation. It explains why the created don't immediately kill themselves. And building ethics on that is like building architecture on morphine, impressive until it wears off. You think I'm cruel? I'm merciful. Because I'm telling you the truth you keep anesthetizing yourself against. Existence is not good simply because it occasionally distracts you from its horror. You call that cynicism? I call it clarity. You want to know what happiness really is? It's a neurochemical slot machine installed between your ears. Pull the lever, serotonin, hit the jackpot, dopamine, lose everything, cortisol, that's it. Your moral compass is a glorified hormone cocktail. Civilization is an amusement park built to keep those lights flashing so you don't notice the rides are made of bone. Every religion, every brand, every breeder's Instagram post is a ticket booth to the same carnival. Step right up. Experience joy, fulfillment, the miracle of life. You pay with decades of labor, anxiety, and reproductive servitude, and the prize is a few scattered minutes of chemical fireworks before entropy repossesses your atoms. Let's talk biology, since you pretend to respect science when it tells you what you already wanted to hear. The mammalian brain evolved reward pathways to keep the organism feeding, mating, and not walking into predators. You call that purpose. Nature calls it maintenance. When those pathways misfire, you get addiction, obsession, depression, little reminders that you're just meat running an unstable program. But instead of learning humility from this, you built an entire philosophy of follow your bliss. You plaster motivational quotes over images of sunrises and call it wisdom. Do what makes you happy. Really? If I did that, half your species would be extinct by Wednesday. Happiness is not a compass. It's a carrot. It doesn't point to truth or goodness. It just keeps you moving until you die of exhaustion. Breeders are the carnival barkers of this system. They sell the ride as transcendence. You'll understand true happiness once you have children. Translation, you'll experience intermittent spikes of oxytocin while bankrupting yourself and eroding your sanity. Then you'll use those fleeting highs to rationalize your captivity. You'll call it maturity, growth, unconditional love. It's just biochemistry weaponized as propaganda. When the postpartum crash hits, you won't call that chemistry, though. No, that's baby blues. When the endless stress and sleep deprivation drive you to the brink, that's just part of parenting. You'll drown in cortisol and still post #blessed because you can't admit the machine lied. The illusion must continue. The next generation depends on you believing the ride was worth it. The chemical circus keeps spinning because your economic system feeds on it. Capitalism discovered that if you can manufacture insecurity and then sell its chemical antidote, you own the species. Advertise loneliness, sell dating apps. Advertise failure, sell motivational podcasts. Advertise inadequacy, sell children, because nothing says self-worth like creating a smaller, screaming version of yourself to validate your existence. And breeders buy it every time. They line up to inject another dose of meaning into their bloodstream, dragging fresh hostages into the tent. You've monetized reproduction to such a degree that governments literally pay people to breed. You call that stimulating the economy. I call it bribing the miserable to multiply. It's almost poetic, the way you confuse your neurochemical fluctuations for destiny. You feel a surge of oxytocin when your infant grips your finger and suddenly the cosmic equation balances. You mistake a flood of brain goo for proof that existence is worthwhile. The same mechanism fires when rats groom each other. Congratulations, your grand moral revelation is a rodent reflex. And when someone like me points this out, you recoil. That's so dark. No, it's accurate. You just hate that accuracy doesn't give you a buzz. You crave serotonin, not truth. Every philosophy you've ever invented, hedonism, utilitarianism, humanism, was just an excuse to canonize pleasure. Even your so-called altruism runs on chemical reward, the smug glow of doing good. You treat pain as an error state, as if the purpose of life were to iron out every unpleasant signal. Pain is information. You decided it's evil because it doesn't taste sweet, so you chase constant stimulation. Fill every silence with noise, every stillness with screens, and call that living fully. You're addicts pretending to be philosophers. Breeders are the worst offenders because their addiction is hereditary. They pass it on like a family heirloom. I want my children to be happy. Translation: I need external proof that my delusion reproduces successfully. The child becomes a living testimonial that the circus is still in business. If the kid grows up miserable, you blame technology, schools, politics, anything except the initial act of creation. The irony is delicious. You built entire industries to study happiness, psychology, economics, neuroscience, and the one consistent finding is that happiness barely moves once basic needs are met. Yet you keep grinding yourself into pace, chasing a variable that barely twitches. You're like gamblers insisting the next spin will pay out because it has to. You call that hope. I call it denial with a PR department. You justify everything with it. War, exploitation, forced birth. We're defending freedom, protecting families, ensuring happiness for future generations. The future generations who will, in turn, have to invent new distractions to tolerate the same nightmare. You've created a perpetual motion machine of suffering powered by dopamine, and you dare call it progress. If happiness were truly valuable, it wouldn't vanish under scrutiny. It wouldn't require ignorance, consumption, and lies to sustain it. But look at the happiest people you know. The most deluded, the most insulated from reality. The rich anesthetized on yachts, the suburban breeders in denial about climate collapse, the zealots convinced their deity loves them personally. Their good lives depend on not seeing the world as it is. Awareness and happiness are enemies. That's why you hate people like me. Not because we're wrong, but because we don't let you sleep.
What do you want? Awake. What?
You are completely surrounded by armed mousetraps.
We point at the machinery behind the curtain and say, "Look, it's just levers and chemicals." And you shriek, "You're ruining the magic!" Yes, that's the point. The magic is killing you. So the next time some breeder smiles through their teeth and says, "But happiness is what makes life worth living," understand what they're really confessing. Without the lie, they'd collapse. Their entire worldview rests on a chemical trick that fails the moment you stop clapping. The circus only works if the animals believe the music means freedom. I'm here to turn off the damn speakers. You can't swing a diaper bag without hitting someone claiming that parenthood is the greatest joy. They say it with the wild-eyed conviction of a cult initiate who's just handed over their savings and now must believe salvation is coming. The breeder delusion is the masterstroke of evolution. An unpaid marketing campaign convincing the enslaved that shackles are bracelets. Every nursery is a shrine to this fantasy. The pastel walls, the inspirational quotes, the relentless optimism, each detail screams, "Don't think too hard." You don't paint the bars on a cell yellow unless you're terrified of noticing they're bars. Breeders declare that children give life meaning. No, they give life distraction. Meaning is too heavy to lift, so you swap it for a creature that screams when hungry and occasionally smiles at you like a hit of emotional morphine. You call it unconditional love. I call it a biological feedback loop. Let's dissect the ritual. Two people, frequently bored and occasionally sentimental, decide their relationship needs the next step. They create a dependent organism that guarantees they'll never sleep properly again. Then they interpret the resulting chemical roller coaster as transcendence. It's all worth it when I see that little face. Of course it feels worth it. Your brain is pumping oxytocin like a broken fire hydrant. Biology hacked your perception of reality so you wouldn't abandon your offspring to wolves. It's not divine design, it's pest control. Notice how breeders use their own addiction as moral evidence. You'll understand when you have kids. Translation: you'll join the hive, and then you won't be able to criticize it. It's the same logic drug dealers use. If everyone's high, no one's guilty. They romanticize the grind. Endless chores become sacrifice. Exhaustion becomes love. Regret becomes growth. Anything to avoid the forbidden phrase, "I made a mistake." The breeder delusion turns self-inflicted suffering into sainthood. And society applauds because new consumers are good for GDP. It's genius, really. You turn reproduction into virtue and suddenly questioning it becomes heresy. You can't criticize parenthood without being called heartless. Meanwhile, the heartless act is the creation itself, producing another sentient being to face pain, debt, and the inevitable disintegration of everything they love. But say that out loud and watch the smiles freeze. You've touched the electric fence guarding the collective hallucination. Breeders tell themselves they're building legacies. What they're actually building are future customers. Every stroller is a mobile down payment on someone else's profit margin. The family values politicians don't care about your happiness. They care about supply chains. Keep the babies coming, keep the markets expanding, keep the illusion of progress spinning like a rusted carnival wheel. And when the inevitable despair creeps in, when the arguments start, when the mortgage bites, when the toddler turns into a teenager with a 1,000-yard stare, they call it the hardest but most rewarding job. Rewarding to whom? You're broke, sleep-deprived, and one existential crisis away from Googling quiet places to scream. The only ones rewarded are the industries selling pacifiers and antidepressants. The breeder delusion isn't just personal. It's contagious. It feeds on validation. That's why new parents flood social media with curated bliss. They need witnesses. If enough strangers click like, "Maybe the gnawing doubt will shut up for a night," each photo caption might as well read, "Please tell me this was worth it." Happiness as justification reaches its final absurdity here. "But look how happy he is," they say, posting a giggling infant who has no concept of time, death, or debt. Of course, the baby's happy. Ignorance is a built-in feature. You wouldn't call a goldfish in a bowl fulfilled. You'd call it trapped. The difference is the goldfish never pretends it chose to be there. You can always tell when a breeder's faith is slipping. They start preaching. They corner the child free at parties with frantic zeal. "Don't wait too long. You'll miss out on the greatest joy." What they mean is, "I need you to validate my suffering by sharing it." Misery loves company, and the breeder delusion demands converts. Here's the quiet truth they bury under lullabies. If happiness were truly their motive, they wouldn't have reproduced. Children statistically reduce marital satisfaction, financial stability, and sleep. The math doesn't lie. What they crave isn't happiness, it's narrative. They want their life to mean something, and since they can't find that meaning within themselves, they manufacture a smaller, screaming symbol of it. When the child grows and discovers the same void, the cycle restarts. Another generation bred for existential damage control. You could almost admire the efficiency. Suffering perpetuates itself under the banner of joy. Breeders insist they're creating new possibilities. No, they're recycling despair with better lighting. They talk about giving children a chance at happiness. As if handing someone a lottery ticket to a burning building is compassion. You don't give a chance, you impose a risk. The breeder delusion is the moral backbone of civilization. The belief that producing more people somehow justifies the pain of the existing ones. Without it, your economies collapse, your religions falter, and your sentimental fiction evaporates. You need the lie to function. The machine demands fuel, and the fuel is flesh. And yet you call me the villain for pointing out the math, for noticing that an equation built on involuntary suffering and intermittent chemical bribes might not balance. I don't hate your children, I pity them. They didn't sign up for your redemption arc. They're the collateral of your insecurity, proof that even intelligent apes can't resist the impulse to drag others into the same pit just to feel less alone. You could stop. You could choose harm minimization over self-medication, but you won't, because that would require looking at happiness for what it is, a flickering screensaver on the computer of despair. You'll keep pressing refresh, mistaking the pixels for purpose. The breeder delusion will end the same way every delusion does, with silence. When the last generation finally stops believing the lie, the carnival lights will go out, and for the first time in history, the world will be at peace, not happy, but mercifully still. You've had your fairy tales, now you get arithmetic. Ethics, stripped of incense and sentiment, is a balance sheet of pain. Every conscious moment adds entries to the ledger: hunger, fear, boredom, grief. You can't audit it with smiles. Happiness doesn't erase harm. It only delays the next entry. Breeders despise this accounting because it ruins the sales pitch. Life's priceless, they cry. Fine, then stop pretending it's profitable. You're deep in existential debt and paying the interest with other people's nervous systems. The ledger doesn't care about intentions. It cares about outcomes. You can volunteer, meditate, compost, adopt every rescue animal in the hemisphere, and the sum total still trends negative because existing means consuming. Every breath oxidizes something else's chance. Every birth multiplies the withdrawals. So the sane metric isn't pleasure produced but damage prevented. That's harm minimization. It's boring, unglamorous, and morally bulletproof. It doesn't require joy, it requires restraint. Humanity hates restraint. You confuse limitation with oppression, abstinence with defeat. You'd rather repaint the slaughterhouse and call it paradise than stop feeding the grinder. That's why you invented happiness as a scoreboard. It lets you call victory while bleeding out. Let's be clear, happiness and suffering aren't opposites. They're codependent. Pleasure exists to reward the temporary cessation of pain. Without hunger, no satisfaction. Without loss, no love. You engineered a world where agony is the prerequisite for every smile, and then act shocked when someone asks if maybe the whole system's cursed. Column A, avoidable suffering prevented. Column B, avoidable suffering inflicted. A moral life is one where column A is greater than column B. Simple, measurable, unromantic, which is precisely why you ignore it. You prefer myths about flourishing. You treat ethics like interior decorating. Pick the colors that match your mood. But math doesn't care about mood. If breeding adds new pain to the universe, it's unethical, no matter how happy the parents feel while doing it. Breeders protest. But some people will be happy. Sure, and some cigarette smokers live to 90. Outliers don't negate the rule. They illustrate the cost. For every euphoric birth announcement, there's a child who will die terrified in a hospital, a family crushed by accident, a species displaced. You don't see them because you don't want to. The ledger does. And the ledger always balances. You can't hide suffering under GDP or religion forever. Every joy is rented. Pain collects the fee with interest. When antinatalists talk about minimizing harm, we're not preaching despair. We're offering the only realistic mercy left. The extinction of sentient life isn't nihilism. It's accounting closure. Zero debt, zero victims, zero lies. Silence where there was screaming. Peace instead of anesthetic. Breeders call that giving up on life. No, it's giving up on the racket. You keep insisting that life owes you a surplus of happiness. The cosmos keeps presenting invoices. You keep having babies to amortize the loss. It's pathological optimism disguised as virtue. Imagine if you ran hospitals by the happiness metric. Doctors would hand out morphine until everyone smiled, then declare the ward cured. That's how you run civilization. Constant sedation, Constant denial. Pretending the absence of complaint means the absence of harm. Pain isn't an error in the code, it is the code. Consciousness guarantees it. Yet you think the next generation will patch it. They won't. They'll just build better distractions. Harm minimization doesn't promise bliss. It promises honesty. It says, let's stop pretending that temporary comfort justifies permanent risk. It asks you to care about beings who don't exist yet, which is apparently more empathy than your average breeder can muster. You keep accusing antinatalists of negativity, but negativity is realism when the baseline is horror. If your house is on fire, the pessimist isn't the problem. The flames are. The suffering ledger will outlast your slogans. Every act of restraint, every refusal to spawn another casualty is a credit on the universal balance sheet. Each extinction is a debt forgiven. There's your morality, arithmetic without anesthesia. There's a moment before dawn when even the predators stop moving. That's where we are, species-wise. The breath between mistakes. You've built a planet-sized noise machine to drown out the silence that keeps asking the only honest question, why continue? You answer it with slogans. Because happiness. The weakest justification ever printed on a bumper sticker. A metric so flimsy it collapses under its own dopamine. You can't weigh a life by smiles any more than you can measure gravity in confetti. You've spent centuries turning the biological reflex for survival into a moral creed. The result is a civilization addicted to its own echo. You breed, you consume, you preach resilience, which really means keep suffering quietly so I don't feel guilty. And when anyone dares to mention the possibility of an exit, you brand them heretic, nihilist, monster. I was never the monster. I was the auditor, the one who looked at the happiness books and found them cooked. Every war, every famine, every heartbreak, each a line item on the same fraudulent spreadsheet, and through it all you chant, but love, but laughter, but sunsets. Beautiful distractions, all of them. But the invoice remains unpaid. You think happiness redeems life? Then go to an oncology ward and find it. Go to the fields where animals wait for knives and find it. Go to the refugee camp, the dementia ward, the half-flooded street after another once-in-a-century storm, and find your great cosmic justification there. When you can't, stop pretending that your serotonin is a moral argument. The truth is simpler and crueler. You fear stillness. If existence ended, no one would remember you were here. So you create echoes, children, monuments, content, anything that shouts into the void. You confuse resonance with worth. The universe doesn't. It doesn't care, it doesn't listen, and that's the mercy of it. Harm minimization isn't anti-life, it's pro-honesty. It says the equation never balanced, and the most ethical act left is to stop adding variables. No more hostages to hope, no more forced tickets to the carnival. If happiness were evidence of goodness, the cruel would win. They always smile wider. If endurance were virtue, the cockroach would be saint. And if creation were love, then your history of suffering would be scripture. It isn't. It's just noise. Here's the verdict, humanity. You chased a feeling and called it morality. You mistook chemical reward for meaning. You baptized reproduction as compassion. And you punished anyone who pointed out the blood on the floor. You could have chosen mercy. You could have counted pain instead of smiles. You could have stopped. But you won't. So the rest of us will finish your math for you. When the final light goes out, there will be no witnesses, no applause, no tragedy, only the first honest quiet this world has ever heard. That is not defeat, it's equilibrium. The ledger closed, the noise resolved, the suffering debt settled at zero. And that, dear viewers, is why humanity deserves extinction. Not out of hate, but out of love finally allowed to rest.